So, how many of you had a chance to see anemones, kalaniot, this winter? In the Roma Dome or in the north, or even exactly a lot, I see. And I'm sure you have enjoyed it, right? These wild reserves are made possible due to conservation strategies that Israel took in order to preserve and keep these precious gems safe from urbanization. They are not only for recreational purposes, they provide a safe zone for many different organisms, and they maintain more diversity than meets the eye. But first, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the biological variety and variability of life on Earth. Here you can see a tiny representation of species that we know, and each species encompasses great variation within it. This variation is what makes us different between each other, but within our species, Homo sapiens. Or for example, within pumpkins and dogs. Biodiversity can be measured at the morphological level, by morphological differences, and also the DNA level, the genetic basis of variation. Understanding how we can define strategies for biodiversity conservation is of high importance, especially today at the time of climate change. We are in the midst of a period of climate change, one that is distinctively more rapid and it is not due to natural causes. Together with urbanization, this causes natural habitats of wild species to become smaller and less adapted for them, less fitted for them. If we lose diversity of some species, we lose important variation that is crucial for the species to survive. Greater variation provides a safety net of beneficial traits that can save species from being extinct. I'm not going to talk about species extinction, which is an important subject of its own, but I will talk about conservation of wild species, which is what I currently study throughout my PhD in the lab of Avi Levy. I work on the genetic variation of wild emmer wheat, what we call in Hebrew emmer chita, which is the direct ancestor of both bread and pasta wheat, and was discovered by Aaron Aronson in Israel in the beginning of the last century. Being that it is a valuable resource for beneficial traits that can be later introduced to our elite wheat varieties. Resistance to drought stresses, increased yield, higher nutritional values are traits which are already available in the immense gene bank of nature. We study the wild wheat of Amiad, close to the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. This area was declared as a natural reserve by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, which allowed us to collect samples from there for the last 36 years. It is actually a multi-generational project, as Avi started it when he was in his PhD here in the Weizmann Institute. We have collected seeds from sampling points that were marked with pegs and GPS coordinates every 3 to 5 meters, over 8 different ecological niches, which you can see in this video. Over the course of the study, dramatic climatic changes occurred, such as drastic increases in temperature and atmospheric CO2 content. A basic question in this field of study, which is called population genetics, and Amiad is a wheat population, is what forces act on a population that causes its dynamics or stability? How do wild populations change over time and space? In order to try to answer this question, we have sequenced the DNA of Amiad wheat collection, which consists of more than 800 samples, and it revealed remarkable genetic variation. This genetic diversity is represented here by the different colors, which appear to correspond with the ecological niches. This pattern was repeating year after year, and the wheat remained incredibly stable over the last 36 years. For example, there is a specific variety, which we call genotype, that resides under this tree and hasn't changed throughout the study. The same variety could be found in the same spot for decades, while immediate neighbors just a few meters away in a different ecological niche were of a different variety. So we discovered high diversity in a small area that is stable over time. In this plot, you can see the distribution of varieties represented by the different colors along space in the x-axis and throughout the years of collection in the y-axis. Did some varieties we detected have gone through adaptation to ecological niches so that they perform better in the south-facing slope, which is hotter than the north-facing slope? Do some varieties are more suitable for growing in the valley rather than on the top of the hill? Could it be that what we see happened by chance, or just because the wild wheat does not disperse much, does not disperse its seeds to long distances? Our analysis show that this strong correspondence to ecological niches and stability over time could not be achieved by natural processes alone, by random distribution. We also ran simulations that show that the similar pattern could be achieved only under unrealistic parameters of seed dispersal. These results open new questions which are possible to answer with Amiad unique collection. The diversity and structure of Amiad, together with modern genetic tools, can provide us the opportunity to find the genetic basis of beneficial traits. We learned from this study that conservation of wild plants biodiversity at sites like Amiad can be achieved in a relatively small area, as Amiad is only 600 meters in diameter. So establishing natural reserves of crop ancestors partially protected from anthropogenic activities such as urbanization and grazing does not necessarily require fencing large areas and is a feasible goal that is critical for biodiversity conservation. This will allow us to preserve high diversity and valuable genetic resources for crop plants like wheat. Wheat is the most widely grown crop in the world and is a major source for human nutrition all across the globe. The resilience that we just saw of wild wheat population in the face of climate change can be transferred to our elite wheat varieties, to our bread wheat and pasta wheat, and to ensure food security. So this project has been for a long year, so many people were involved, and I really want to thank all of them. So especially Avi, my mentor, and Fabrizio from our lab, Naomi, Amir, and the founders of this project, Moshe Feldman from our department, and Yoshua Anixter from Tel Aviv University, and our collaborators in Vienna, Magnus Nordborg Lab, especially Tom Ellis, and our funding. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tal, for this really interesting talk. Any questions? We have time for. Yes.
I have a question regarding how did you determine what were your gene markers on which you based the genetic variation?
Yeah. So since the wheat genome is very big, it's 4 times the genome of humans, of us, we couldn't sequence the entire genome, so we took 5,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms, 5,000 markers, all across the wheat genome, and it gave us a very high specification to understand which varieties are which and how they differ between each other and what is the relationship between them.
Do you see like any adaptations between like the ecological niche in which you found certain variation and certain polymorphisms?
So we saw a few places in the genome that that go up in correspondence to ecological niche, but now we are doing a big experiment of phenotyping of morphological differences to really connect between the traits, the morphological traits, and the genetics. So this is work ongoing.
Are you allowed in a nature reserve to also do causality experiments? For example, take a type of wheat from one place and try to grow it in another and see how that affects that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is what's called in the field transplantation experiments. We are allowed, but it will destroy the population. So if we put the seeds there in a different place, we cannot we cannot make sure that they are not dispersed and to catch them, because the wild wheat is dispersing much easier than bred wheat, than modern wheat. So we don't want to do it, because maybe this project will continue even more years. So what we did in the morphological experiment that we did now, we actually brought 12 tons of soil from Amiad to the Weizmann Institute and try to resemble the conditions that we have in Amiad here in a common garden experiment to grow all the different varieties in a single common garden.
There was a change in the birds and insects over these years, so how much does this affect the plants?
Wow, that's a good question. So, yeah, we actually don't know. We do know that also the insects and birds are moving the seeds quite a lot. We see that the ants there are moving the seeds quite a long distance, which can really affect the dispersal of the wheat. But yeah, we don't know. I don't know.
How long is one generation of the wheat plant?
Yeah. So a generation of wheat plant is 1 year, because it's an annual plant. So 36 years is 36 generations.
Okay, so I'd like to thank once again Tal.